We're talking today with Eric Nelson of Jenison, Michigan, and the interviewer is James Smither of the Grand Valley State University Veterans History Project. Okay, Eric, start us off with some background on yourself, and to begin with, where and when were you born?
Oh, born in Grand Rapids, St. Mary's Hospital, March 20th, 1947.
All right. And did you grow up in Grand Rapids?
Grew up in Wyoming Park,
Okay.
which is a suburb.
And what was your family doing for a living then?
My mother was a homemaker back in the days when that was a normal thing. And then my father was a mechanic at the Michigan Consolidated Gas Company, which turned into, I believe, DTE.
All right. And when did you finish high school? Or did you finish high school?
Yes, would have been 1965 in June.
Okay. And what did you do when you got out of high school?
A lot of things of what I didn't do, but the main thing about then was I worked for Schenzel's Cafeteria as a manager, assistant manager, and which was fun. I love food service, and at one point in time I was getting paid for 65 hours a week. That was a 6-day week, and I also was going to junior college. So it was a very hectic time, and dating every single night. So It was a very fun time of my life.
And how long did you do that?
Couple years, 1965, and then in 67, well, what I had done is I had quit college just to take a break. I had a target on my back with the Selective Service, so I volunteered as a reservist with a 1-year commitment to go to meetings and then a 2-year active duty commitment.
Okay.
So in 67, I gave my papers to my boss because I had gotten my orders to go active.
Okay. And which service branch did you enlist in?
Navy.
Okay. And why did you pick the Navy?
My idea of the Air Force was you had to not wear glasses. Everybody thinks of flying with the Air Force, not all the other stuff. I didn't want the Army, and I didn't think I could handle the Marines. They'd beat me up. So Navy was my choice.
All right. Now, were you paying? Now, you were so busy, I suppose. Otherwise, were you paying any attention to what was going on in Vietnam or anything then?
Only what you read in the newspapers, and I didn't really study it. I read the newspaper every night, but between that and a little bit of TV, I just knew there was stuff happening, most of which I didn't believe. Quite honestly, everything you read was to the ultimate, whatever. I don't believe that kind of stuff, still don't.
Well, the news still does that. When there's a war on some place, you see a certain chunk of it and not the rest.
They have to sell advertising.
Yeah. All right. So, but at the same time, I suppose that most of it was going on land. If you were in the Navy.
Well, yes. I didn't know I was going to Vietnam. I was in the Navy. I didn't know what I wanted to do. I mean, I had a couple of choices and stuff like that, but at that point, I really didn't care. I wasn't going to do it for a lifetime commitment. I knew then I wasn't going to be a lifer.
Right.
So all I was looking at is 2 years in and 2 years back, I'd be back.
Okay. So you enlisted in 67?
I enlisted, prior to that. I got my first active duty papers. That's when I quit my job, and 2 weeks later, after my boss replaced me, I got sent a second set of papers saying, oh, why don't you wait a year?
Oh.
So I did factory work, flipped hamburgers, did anything, because that I did not have the right, the federal right, to jump back into my job.
Yeah.
The conditions weren't there.
Okay. Had you already done the Navy boot camp?
Yes.
Okay, so when did you do that?
Oh man, that was pretty quick to my enlistment. Into the reserves.
Yeah.
I did that, and then I came back out. But then they have on duty for training, and I took a small ship, big boat, from Green Bay, Wisconsin area over to Detroit. It took us 2 weeks.
Mhm.
And then because of my second set of orders, that put me another year as a reservist.
Mhm.
And we went up to, or I went up to north of Northbrook, Illinois, Great Lakes.
Mhm.
And by that time, I was put in the kitchen, put in the galley. I was a cook.
All right. To back up, but you had already done the boot camp before all of that.
The boot camp was behind me by then.
Yeah. Okay. What did the boot camp actually consist of?
For us,
Mhm.
I can't remember how long I was there. I know it wasn't a real long boot camp. But, I mean, this is funny. I mean, it really is. The person that was in charge of our barracks, that's 90 people, had been out of things for so long. He'd been a clerk, office work, that in the evening, we always sit down together and he'd go through what he was supposed to teach us the next day.
Mhm.
So we would help him so that he understood, so he could teach us. It really was cool. I mean, there's sure one guy didn't shave one day, and so he had to shave 3 times a day after that, and until he was raw. You got to play that when you're in boot camp. We would march around the Great Lakes. We couldn't hear the guy that was in front of us. Okay, he was a E2, I think, at the time, which is next to the bottom,
Mhm.
and he couldn't keep count. So the back half of the 90 guys, we would whistle the tune to F Troop and keep everybody in tune where we went. And it's just kind of a fun thing, but we never got caught, and it helped us better, be better. So we just had fun with it.
Okay. Yeah. So, on a practical level, what were you supposed to learn there?
Oh, in boot camp?
Yeah.
I honestly believe the best, most important part of boot camp is the initial being able to care for each other, depend on each other, help each other. It's like the guy that had to shave,
Mhm.
3 times a day. We were helping him because he was actually scraping his face raw. You do something wrong in boot camp and it follows you for a while. Somebody else made a mistake when the officers came around to check our bedding and stuff like that, and we all got behind him. So the most important thing is the camaraderie and the learning to work with, be accountable to, everything about that with your fellow person in the service. All the rest of it was just minor stuff that got us to that point.
Okay. All right then. So, and then when you were talking about kind of sailing around in the Great Lakes, was this sort of the kind of stuff that you do while you're in reserve status, and you?
This was just one of my reserve 2-week
Yeah.
training.
Right.
That's what they assigned me to. I don't know what everybody else does,
Yeah.
but
Okay. But when you were doing that, that was still just part of the reserve duty. It
Yeah.
was not active duty.
no, it was not active duty. It was just more reserve training.
Okay.
Just like the next year, I did it again, and by that time, I ended up on the base, up north there, and I drew taking people's places that went on leave in the kitchen,
Mm-hmm.
and that was my background, so I just fell right into it.
Okay. All right. So then when do you go on active duty then? When does that finally actually start?
I actually went late November. The one thing that is, I will say that did get to me is my best friend from high school had been killed in Vietnam. He laid in the field for about 3 days before they could get him back.
Mm-hmm.
Then they brought him back and had an open casket.
Oh.
And I knew I was leaving in a week. And by then I knew I was Vietnam.
Mm-hmm.
that is quite sobering, but you can't tell your relatives that. You just have to keep it in. And, you know, I went to the funeral myself because he was my friend.
Mhm.
So my family didn't see the possibilities of how I might be seen again by them.
Sure. Okay, so you get a call, okay, we have your assignment for you, and you have to report in November of '68 to start up, is that, or had you?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. Now, do you go get directly to an assignment on a ship someplace, or do you get any additional training or staging before that?
Staging, not training. They sent me out to San Francisco and Treasure Island, as I think they call it out there. So I was at Treasure Island for a short time every day, and then we could go into town while we were being processed. And so finally they just says, hey, get on this airplane, and we went up over Alaska, because that's the shorter way to get there. Stopped in Japan for some fuel, stayed right on the plane. I could say I've been in Japan, and then flew into Tansignu in Saigon.
Okay. And what's your first impression of Vietnam when you get there?
Just, Saigon just looked like an old city, something like you would see out of the movies, like an old Western town without the Western garb.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it just buildings looked like they were kind of slapped together.
Well, some people talk about the heat or the smell or other things like that when they first get off the plane. But that didn't strike you at the point when you landed?
Nothing that okay. It
Now,
really didn't.
Did you know what your assignment was going to be, or just that you would be assigned to something when you got there?
I knew by my orders that I would be assigned to the Jennings County. It's a LST, a lake, okay.
Landing ship tank, yep.
Yep, okay. I knew I'd be on that.
Okay.
Now, the interesting part of it is overnight they kept us in some hotel or something, and we were in bunk beds. So my bunkmate, one above me, had the same assignment to the Jennings County. So we end up getting on a bus, and he goes to the Jennings County. His records told him where it was. Mine did not tell me. My orders did not tell me. I spent the day walking around Tansignu, and it was very hot. Nobody would tell me where the ship was on the telephone line because it was classified. And I walked from building to building, and nobody could tell me. I met this guy coming back in country from his R&R. We just hopped on a plane to the interior. And then they landed at an Air Force base. And he and I both had someplace to be other than that Air Force base, so we got on the road and hitchhiked. Luckily, we were picked up by a friendly ambulance, brought us up the road to the next town, which was a Navy base.
Now, was that on a river, or were you?
It was on the river.
Okay, and are you on the Mekong or the Saigon River, or?
Yeah, we moved back
Okay.
and forth and back and forth. But we had some people on the ship who came down in a small boat, what they call a Higgins boat now.
Yeah.
And they were getting supplies, and they heard me very quietly telling somebody I didn't like their idea of how I should get to my ship. So I was overheard probably 3 blocks away, and somebody came in and said, we're going back there. So I hopped in this Higgins boat with them, put on this inch-thick armor, and went up the river and watched these guys light up and get very happy on the way up. So M16s in their hands and smoking away.
Okay. And smoking something that would make them happy.
Yes.
Yes. All right. So welcome to Vietnam on some level. Okay.
Yep.
All right. Now, once you actually get to the LST, what happens to you?
I hand my sea bag to my bunkmate because they're wondering why I didn't show up, and they thought I had deserted
Yeah.
until they looked at my orders that didn't tell me how to get there. So basically, I found my own way to my duty station.
Right. Okay. And what assignment did you have on the ship?
Oh, at the beginning, you're basically what they call a boatswain's mate. You just swab decks, you paint, you do chip paint, you do anything. You know, you just kind of do the mechanical part, the janitorial part of it, I guess.
Okay. And how long did you just have that kind of job?
I'm gonna say 2 or 3 months maybe. And then there was somebody left the ship that was in the galley, and they knew I had that in my background, so they offered it to me.
Okay.
So then I went from boatswain's mate to working 7 days a week, 12 hours a day, and I was a baker at night.
Okay. Well, but it was probably still hot?
What?
The weather.
Oh, the weather is hot every day
Yeah,
at noon. You know, you have a thunderstorm, we close up all the hatches and everything, and then 10 minutes later we get out brooms and mops. That's the boatswain mate part of it. I worked at night, so most of the days I was sleeping.
Mhm.
After a while, I wasn't active enough for me, so I would work one day and then sleep, and then I'd work the other night,
Mhm.
and then I would read all day. And then the next night I'd sleep, or I'd work,
Mhm.
and then I'd do that pattern. So every other day I slept, and every other day I read.
Mhm.
So it's keep you busy.
Okay. So what do you remember where you were based, or was there a particular town you were at or near?
No, we only went ashore once at a friendly little village,
Mm-hmm.
and it was basically one street. That's all it was. We went on shore for maybe 3 hours. The rest of the time, we just were floating on this LST. It's a flat bottom boat.
Right.
And every day we would move up or down river so nobody would get a fix on us.
Mm-hmm.
And that was it. We stayed there ready to provide help to or repair the river patrol boats. That was our purpose.
All right.
We could bring the river patrol boats that had gotten shot up, we'd bring them aboard, just lift them on a hoist, drop them down in the below deck, and we had the capability of completely remodeling them, let's say, get them running again, put them on the river.
Okay. So you never went into an actual port anywhere?
No, not in Vietnam.
Yeah.
No, it was a nice, I think, quiet time.
Mm-hmm.
We were called upon every once in a while to fire 40 millimeters,
Mm-hmm.
and I was assigned to a gun tub for that, for general quarters.
Mm-hmm.
You know, the Army or the land base would call us and ask for some support, so we would do that. Helicopters would come and land at night, and we would rearm them or give them practice. So then we lit the ship up. Other than that, it was always darkened ship,
Mm-hmm.
you know, because we were sitting in enemy territory. Well, once in a while, I would catch a watch for somebody, and I sat there looking at, well, whoever I was looking at wore pajama-like stuff, and as soon as the sun came up, they suddenly dropped down into the ground. So I'm only assuming that they were Viet Cong. And I just sit there and watch them with my night scope.
Okay. And did you ever take incoming fire?
Once. But I was below deck, and it wasn't serious enough that we called GQ. It just a couple shots and then no more.
Okay.
We didn't see who it was.
All right. And in what ways or what signs did you have that there was a war going on around you? I guess you had the patrol boats that got shot up.
We had patrol boats. Like I said, I saw the Viet Cong.
Mm-hmm.
We did, with a mortar one afternoon, we did take out a sampan. I mean, I don't know if that was luck or not, but we wouldn't have done that unless we knew it was the enemy.
Mm-hmm.
One time when we moved, this was right towards the end of my tour, we moved and the Viet Cong knew we were gonna move. And so they had a little tributary or something, and they had one of their very few large guns,
Mm-hmm.
and they just had it sitting back there waiting for us to pass. So our captain just let the ship idle against the current right in front of them. Gave them the chance to take the first shot, because they would lose a very valuable piece of equipment for
Mhm.
that. So they decided not to. So didn't have to look down their barrel.
So it was on that level kind of a quiet war.
I was in quiet war, quite honestly. I have no problems with my duty. I pity, thank whoever had to be on the ground.
Mm-hmm.
Honestly, I'm glad I wasn't there. I guess I would have if I'd been. I would have been. I could have been on the river patrol boat in the Navy.
Yep.
So I had lucky
Okay.
military service.
How many men were on the ship?
About 165 assigned to it.
Okay.
So every night I made 100 to 120 loaves of bread. And again, a neat thing about it is I lined them all up to cool before we could put them away. And I'd turn my back and a loaf of bread would be missing. And I always knew who it was, because about 15 minutes later, somebody came by and asked me for a pound of butter.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know what they were thinking, but just kind of made me chuckle, you know?
All right. And what was morale like on the ship?
Oh, all told, pretty good. My first 3 or 4 weeks there, I had some trouble with my, first class boatswain's mate and his buddy, the second class. But that was just between them and I, and that was taken care of eventually. No big problem there. When I told you I handed my sea bag up to this guy I'd met in Saigon, I was immediately assigned to sit in one of the gun tubs where the 40 millimeters were, and have this guy show me how to stand watch.
Mm-hmm.
And he immediately got out of sight of the bridge and lit up a cigarette, and I saw 2 different people. When he sat down and before he lit up, his face was tight, angular. And after he'd smoked for a while, he was nice and soft and round. He was really stressed out.
Mm-hmm.
But morale itself for the whole ship, no problem.
Mm-hmm. And was the crew all white, or did you have a mix of people on it?
It was all white, all white. And back then I think I would have known the difference.
Mm-hmm.
It would have, like today, honestly, I'm doing my best to be unified in my way of thinking. But it actually works sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, it was all, I'm going to say, Caucasian.
Mm-hmm.
We went to the Philippines to have the ship worked on,
Okay.
and obviously then you have, mixed.
Mm-hmm.
And then we went to Hong Kong for a short R&R, a week-long R&R, and the Chinese would come on board. Whatever we didn't eat, for whatever meal it was, they would come on board, just put it all in 5-gallon pails and take it, and that was, again, it's another way you wake up to what the rest of the world is like, and you really appreciate the United States.
Yeah. And when you went to the Philippines, did you go to Subic Bay or?
Subic Bay,
Okay.
yes.
And that area is kind of notorious as a recreational center, or was at the time.
We were told that once a week there was a Navy personnel would be floating down the river, a little creek between the naval base and Olongapo. One time, 5 of us got in one of their little jeepneys. It's the way they travel around, and we negotiated a deal on how much it would cost for us to be taken to the far end of town, so as our night progressed, we get closer to the ship, right? So we did that. The guy turned on down a side street, which is a no-no, and he pointed this little revolver at us and said, "Now you're going to give me what I want." So he did. We got off. We gave him what he wanted, and we still got off. It's just part of it. I mean, it's a different type of world.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I don't know, I can't say a whole lot about it. It's just another experience that I honestly look back at, and I don't regret it. I didn't particularly care for it because I didn't know if I was going to get off that thing by myself or not, but we just kept it cool. We weren't drunk. We hadn't yet begun to party, so we all kept our cool, did what he wanted, and that's, you know.
Okay.
But Olongapo is one of the cities where we weren't allowed to go off, one step off the sidewalk. They had bar after bar after bar on the sidewalk level, street level, but above them was bar after bar after bar. And we weren't allowed to go upstairs because then it was really rough. So,
Yeah, well, you've had a lot of prostitution there as well as
oh, we got
drinking.
everything you want there.
Yeah.
Yes.
All right. And of course, Hong Kong, I mean, that was, in a lot of ways, at least part of it, a modern city.
Again, we were taught, you know, if we were in the nice part of the city and everything, fine. But you could walk down a street and look down a side street and you would see the Chinese flags at every doorway. A little like an 8 by 12 or a 12 by 14 flag, and you were not to go down those streets because you might never be heard from again. So even though they were nice to us because we were spending our money there, we knew that we were on the edge of not a democracy, not a nice place.
Okay. Now, when you were then out at sea, did you hit rough weather or was it calm?
The one time, now, again, I'll back up. I always wondered why this LST, which is pretty much a flat bottom boat. For a civilian, it kind of looked like an oar boat that you see in the Great Lakes, but smaller. And then in the middle, there was nothing. So the framework of the boat is basically the deck, the sides, and the bottom. Well, we had a foot wide piece of metal that was an inch thick, welded all the way around the ship, inside and out. Now we're out to sea, and I figured out why. Because I stepped outside on deck in bad weather, which I wasn't supposed to, but I had to see what the sea was like, right? And I saw the front of the boat go down as the back of the boat went down. Or they would both come up, or the front would come up, do a right twist, as the left was doing a left twist. So that boat was doing this the whole time, and I kind of figured that's what that strip of metal was. And sure enough, I did dig into it, and at one time the ship had split in a storm. But it was safe.
Okay, well, I don't know. Did you get seasick?
Here's another story. My working 12 hours in an air-conditioned galley baking. I baked cakes and breads and donuts, and, you know, whatever they needed. But it was air-conditioned. All I drank all night long was a number 10 can, about that big around, that high, of reconstituted milk. I didn't stop to make a meal or anything like that. I just drank this stuff all night long. Our air conditioning failed. I watched the thermometer go up. And when it hit about 120, 125, I had to go out on the deck. That milk and that temperature did not, but that is the only time I got sick.
That may have been the warm milk as much as anything else. All right.
So I lost a whole bunch of pie crust because I was on deck, and the pie crust, you know, it's made out of lard, a lot of, you know, lard or whatever you want to call it, and it just melted. So it melted off the baking table, down through all the drawers and across the floor. So anyway, again, not a bad idea.
All right. Now, while you were on the ship, I mean, did you know anything about what was going on in the outside world, or was your world just really what was on the boat?
We would read Stars and Stripes. We had radios, and I would be listening to an Australian show or station all night. So yeah, we got a little bit from their point of view. And then what I did before I went active is I bought 2 tape recorders. So I left one home with my girlfriend, and I took one with me, and so we would just tape.
Mm-hmm.
So there'd be a little bit of news going back and forth that way too. But again, any of that stuff is open to being, looked at or
Mm-hmm.
listened to. So, there's nothing, oh, I'm here, this is what we did today. No, because they, redact it anyway.
Okay. Yeah, because I guess censorship in Vietnam seems to have varied somewhat, or I get different stories. But you were junior enlisted, so
Yeah,
it may have been that much harder to say much.
that could be, but I wouldn't have.
Yeah.
Why do something or say something that might jeopardize my fellow Americans?
Right.
And besides that, I didn't want my girlfriend and my family to know anything wrong in Vietnam. Why
Mhm.
should they worry?
Mm-hmm.
So as far as they were concerned, I was on a cruise ship, in the Caribbean. I would not tell bad things.
Mm-hmm.
They don't need to know that stuff.
Well, in your case, was there much bad to tell?
Oh, when we stood watch, we had to shoot into the river at anything.
Mm-hmm.
Log, tree branches, trash, because we didn't know if somebody would be sending down a mine onto the
Mhm.
ship. And one day somebody put a whole bunch of rounds into this, made a target practice out of it, and we found out it was an American that had been killed upriver.
Mm-hmm.
That tends to make you sick.
Yeah.
Takes the fun out of everything. I don't know. A couple times when helicopters came in, they didn't do what they were told, and I know better. You hit the tail rotor of a helicopter on the side of the ship, and anybody around there is pretty much wiped out,
Yeah.
especially those that are standing next to a container full of armament. And I was, so that wasn't happy. 40 millimeters, World War II anti-aircraft weapons. They tend to hang fire every once in a while. At the end of cleaning the gun tub on a mission to do something for the ground troops, I looked into it, which I wasn't supposed to, but that wasn't me, and I saw there was a hang fire in there. And within about 3 minutes, it's supposed to blow up sideways and take the breech in half.
Okay. So when you say hang fire, is that a shell that did not fire properly?
Correct.
that-
So here it was 5 minutes, and that shell hasn't fired, and that it's just getting hot from the breech of the gun, because we've been firing for 15 minutes at least. And I was the one that had to stay up there and hand fire it somehow,
Mhm.
or eject it,
Yeah.
either or. And I figured right then that I would be found in 2 pieces down the river, because that's what happens.
So what did you do?
The person up on the bridge that told me not to look in that, I had a dictionary full of words as I was doing it,
Mm-hmm.
because it was pure adrenaline, no thought process whatsoever, and I didn't think I'd be living through it. It was ejected into a kid's hands that, he had asbestos gloves on, and he threw it overboard. So nothing happened, but it was 2 minutes past the time it was supposed to happen.
Mm-hmm.
So
All right.
that's it.
Okay.
And now it's a story to tell.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. And so, are there other particular memories you've got from that year's tour over in Vietnam?
No, not really. I'm not saying that it was the best way to be.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, while I only did, you didn't mention it yet, but I did a year and a month over there.
Mm-hmm.
So I was going to get married on my year R&R. I was
Mhm.
going to come back to the States and get married. My wedding was all being planned and everything. But then they came around with the war's kind of winding down. So anybody that would like to re-up in Vietnam for 6 months can get out 6 months early. Well, that was early enough that I re-upped instead of being sent on an R&R.
Mm-hmm.
So I basically traded with the government and I got out early. So I got out and then got married 3 weeks later. So, anybody would re-up for 6 months.
Yeah.
Then they changed their mind and said anybody that had done that, had signed up for it, got out now.
Oh,
So then instead of 18 months, I actually was in service for 13,
mm-hmm.
which was to my favor.
Oh, you could have been a Marine at that point, because Marines did 13 months for some reason.
Well, see, they were winding down. If that was the case, yeah.
But the Marines with the standard tour was 13 months, because the ground troops are there for a year. The Army is 12 months.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I had a year
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
until I re-upped,
Right.
and then I never had to spend it, and they let me out.
Okay. So how do you get back to the States?
How did I get back?
Yeah, what's the process? You know.
Here's another one. Thanksgiving. The cooks all got together, and we actually put the Thanksgiving food making operation together like it was a battle plan. You only have so many ovens, but you want to make 14 times the amount of food. We made food. I was up for 24 hours straight, baking and cooking. And we sent, by this little boat that we had assigned to us, we sent as much as we could to the shores, the Army, the Marines, whoever was on shore, just trip
Mhm.
after trip all day long. I was already packed, my sea bag was packed. All I did was change out of the whites that I was in and hopped on a helicopter and flew to Saigon. That was it, 24 hours straight on duty, doing what I loved.
Mhm.
Hopped on a helicopter. They took me to Saigon and put me on an airplane, and I was sleeping before we took off.
Mhm.
Everybody else was mad at me for sleeping, but hey, I'm on my way home.
Yeah. Okay.
Stopped in LA, again, Treasure Island, and mustered out from there.
That'd be San Francisco.
San Francisco, I'm sorry.
Right. Okay. And then you flew home from there?
Yep.
Okay. Now, when you're going through the airports, were there protesters or anything like that?
I didn't see them. All this stuff being spat on and stuff like that, I'm coming back to Grand Rapids, Midwest. I don't think we were too rabid at that time.
Well, Grand Rapids wouldn't have been the place. LA would have been the place if you would have seen
Yeah,
it.
but I was protected.
Mhm.
Even going in, you're short hair. Everybody knows you're military.
Right.
When I was on duty for training and was up north of Chicago,
Mhm.
I came into Chicago with a buddy, and we were in civilian clothes, and we did not go places because there were bad enough anti-war places that we figured we wouldn't come out.
Yeah.
So we just stayed away from them. You gotta stay smart.
Yeah.
So
Okay. So he was aware, but it didn't affect your return home or anything like that.
not for me, not at all.
Okay. Now, and then once you were out, you get married, you go back to work, or what do you do?
I go up to Mount Pleasant where she is going to school, and that's it. We lived up there for the next 10 years or so. I went to college up there on the GI Bill,
Mhm.
finished up on the GI Bill, and then got a job, found a job there that paid the most in the city. So that's all I knew. Didn't even know what the company did at the time.
Mhm.
And it took me about 10 years, then an opening came up in Grand Rapids, and I moved back to Grand Rapids. Been here ever since.
All right. Now, to look back at the time that you spent in the service, how do you think that affected you, or what did you learn from it?
I guess I better say it. I had a very stressful job at my company at one time, and I could handle it. And I don't know if you know anything about like Chicago people. They don't do anything unless they want to. I was a strong enough personality that they did what I wanted.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't make a lot of friends. In the hourly people that work for me, I think really liked me. But other management people I don't think quite got why I was right on edge,
Mhm.
which after I retired, I realized, yeah, so now I take a few pills and I'm a nice human being again.
So that
But I
is
could handle the stress because of what Vietnam did to me.
okay. So it's sort of a shading of what gets labeled PTSD or something that
Yes.
affects your personality.
Same
a little
medicine.
bit. Yeah.
Same medicine.
Mhm.
So I can understand when people have it.
Okay. Do you think you got anything positive out of the experience?
Anything positive?
Yeah.
Oh, working together,
Mhm.
seeing parts of the world and seeing how they have to live. Or like, I can't walk down a street. Who in Grand Rapids thinks that way, right?
Mhm.
We're naive around here. The Midwest, we're pretty naive. We got a good life, respective of what
Yeah.
complaints we might find. But no, what the third world has to deal with, talking to some of the guys, on the ship, what their upbringing was and stuff like that. How do I say it? Guy wanted to commit suicide. Okay, he got sent to a mental institution from the ship because he was pretty much gone. They revived him. Being on a ship that has riverboats with, I don't know, about 40 people, and a week later the last man is sent out to a mental institution. All the rest of them lost their lives.
Mhm.
That makes you wake up. You learn
Yeah.
stuff. Again, I'm an individual, I know, but every once in a while I had to go down in the, refrigerators,
Mhm.
walk-in refrigerators. And for whatever reason, they brought somebody aboard in a body bag.
Mhm.
They locked him in my walk-in freezer, walk-in refrigerator. So I had to go find somebody with a key to the padlock because I had to do my job.
Mhm.
And then I had to crawl past him all night long as I came down to get more supplies.
Wow.
And it was just like I said, hi to him and
Mhm.
bye to him and, wished him well. I wouldn't open the bag. He was being protected for something, so I don't know who he was. And then the next morning, before I went off duty, they needed to put him on a helicopter, so I was one of the guys that volunteered. That's the least you can do. But, that was just respect for somebody that gave everything, and I was lucky enough not to.
Yeah. So you have this set of experiences that's really pretty distinct from most of what the rest of us ever are going to encounter.
If you're in the military, you have experiences.
Mhm.
Yes, I don't regret them. I think they're neat. Do I stand next to people if they need it? I think that goes back to my service days.
Yeah.
And now what I end up doing, it's like it's come out that somebody calls me up, just wants to talk. We talk for 20 minutes. It has been proven that there are people out there that have done that, and then that person who made the call changed his mind on committing suicide. So now I guess 20 minutes of my life could save a life.
Yeah.
It's a powerful feeling.
So it makes for more of a story than you said you had when you walked in.
But I am not going to, I've said the bad things,
Yeah.
but they're experiences.
Mhm.
Yeah, would I have liked not to have been through them? Of course. But is it dragging me down? I think I would have probably gone higher in my company if it weren't for this little thing called PTS, which we didn't
Yeah.
know, or I didn't know, and they don't know.
Mhm.
I probably could have gone higher, but it is what it is. I can't be upset about it.
All right. Well, I'd just like to close here, but just thank you very much for taking the time to share the story today.
Thank you very much.